Greetings. Just this past weekend, I had heard that Pastor Kelly Richardson was planning on addressing so-called urban apologists in a forthcoming video, and that the video or multiple videos would probably also address some of the linguistic disputes that have come up recently. Now, that latter part caught my attention as the linguistic questions are where my personal interests are. So when his first installment of this series premiered on Sunday, I tuned in to watch it with interest. And however, while watching the video, my initial thought was that perhaps too many different subjects or points of dispute were piled together. He discussed disparate disputes with Damon Richardson, with Nefertiti, with Vocab Malone, and passing reference was also made to Faithful to God as well as to myself. And while the collective swirl of topics results in a video which is over an hour long, honestly, I would say that perhaps some of the individual topics therein didn't always receive enough attention. Whatever the case, putting that aside, when I started watching the video, I was curious if he would address some of the arguments which I've presented, whether in videos or in typed correspondences, on either the topic of the Georgia pews or on the topic of Lashawan Quadash. And at first glance, it seemed that I was only mentioned for a second. So, it seemed as though the video had nothing to do with me, which would have been fine. However, later on, I noticed the video description, which I would argue pretty clearly gives me a more central relevance to the entire video. So I'd like to take a brief look at what the video description states, or how it reads. Here, take a look at this. Quote, "I've made an assertive effort in keeping my distance from what seems to be an endless discussion that's spearheaded by those with hidden agendas who use Calvinism to disguise their overall narrative of hate and self-hate towards the Hebrew Israelites. However, Pastor Kelly's name was entered into the discussion by Vocab, Abu, and Faithful to God in their tasteless video about the pews built by the hands of Hebrew Israelite slaves in 1773 back in November. Their agenda was and is to use this historical landmark as a tool to debunk the Negroes who are waking up to their identity. This historical landmark was led by Pastor Kelly's great-great-uncle, Pastor James Wesley Carr. They've made it clear that they're more concerned with their social media numbers than they are about the coronavirus. To them, the Hebrew Israelites are more of a threat to them than the current pandemic." End quote. The reason why I found that relevant is because it seems to clearly state that what motivated Pastor Richardson's video was a video from last autumn about the Georgia pews. That's in reference to a video which I made. Actually, it was 3 videos which I made last October, and then which were hosted on Faithful to God's account that same month, which again was last October. A few months later, Vocab Malone uploaded an edited compilation of those videos to his own channel, and that was just this past March. So the salient point here is that it was videos that I had made which motivated Pastor Kelly Richardson to go this route. Unfortunately, however, Pastor Kelly Richardson didn't address any of my actual arguments in his first video in this series. Nonetheless, as I said, I have an interest in the topics which are related to language. So in this video, I'd like to discuss the portions of Pastor Richardson's video which were related to that, to the linguistic questions. I won't be touching on the other topics, such as his dispute with Nefertiti, or his disagreements with Vocab Malone's comedic skits, or the Trinity, etc. I'm just going to focus on the language-related portions. So this first segment, which I'm going to look at, was directly related to me. It covers some of the same ground mentioned in the video description, which we just went over. Since Pastor Richardson feels that previous videos avoided points that he felt were salient, I'm going to play long stretches of this segment in an attempt to catch everything. And occasionally I'm going to pause it to offer my own comments. So here we go.
I was entered into this discussion without my knowledge or consent back in November when his running buddy, Abu, and Faithful to a God, made a tasteless video about the pews that has Hebraic writings on them at the First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia.
I want to interject here really quickly to point out that he referred to a video from last November. As I mentioned, that was a video which I had made on the Georgia pews. It was actually made in October, but the precise month isn't really relevant. What's relevant is that he's referring to a video from last autumn, from the fall of 2019. I mention that because the time frame is going to be relevant in a bit.
Which was built by Hebrew Israelite slaves well before the birth of Crowdy, whom they deemed to be the founder of what they call Hebrewism or Israelism. Their purpose in bringing this historical landmark into play is to use this as a tool in their attempts to discredit the identity of the Negroes who are awakening to their Hebrew Israelite identity.
Quick note, my video from last autumn had absolutely nothing to do with anyone's identity. Pastor Richardson may see the markings on the pews as intertwined with identity claims, but my videos from the fall of 2019 only focused on the linguistic question, the question of whether there is discernible language in those pews. I see the linguistic question as separate, or at least separable, from questions about identity. I did not make a single claim about the lineage of either Pastor Richardson or anyone else in those videos. So with all due respect to Pastor Richardson, I feel he's unfortunately poisoning the well here, when it would have been better to just focus on the actual arguments about the markings in the pews.
See, according to the Bible, the pseudo-apologia would be called witches. Let me give you a couple of examples of how the entire urban apologetic community, now known as pseudo-apologia, are operating in biblical witchcraft.
Witchcraft. While what he's about to share is actually largely unrelated to my videos from last autumn, he's nonetheless still indirectly accusing my videos of witchcraft. All those videos did was discuss the markings in the pews, and as well as possible methodologies for determining whether discernible language can be found in those markings. Yet Pastor Richardson insinuates that such discussion somehow constitutes witchcraft. Honestly, this is little more than engaging in mere name calling rather than addressing the actual points raised in those videos.
Example number 1, the tasteless video they did about the pews. Here's the clip from both videos that's narrated by Abu, that's on Vocab Malone and Faithful to a God YouTube channel titled Not Hebrew on the Church Pews. Translate, we dare you.
Say Shalom. I'm here at the First African Baptist Church here down in Savannah, Georgia. This is the church that have ancient Hebraic writings.
Oh, it's actually a common Hebrew Israelite apologetic to say the first black church in America. This is the way they phrase it. I'm not saying it's accurate because it's not the first, but it's the longest standing. Anyways, they say the first black church in America had Hebrew writing on the pews, and that's proof that our people were originally the Israelites. Have you ever heard this?
The only way that they can say that is by essentially being ignorant of history.
With this title alone, does this sound like words of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah? Does this sound like words from the 12 Hebrew Israelite disciples, or better yet, the Hebrew Israelite who made it clear that he is out of the tribe of Benjamin, the Apostle Paul? See, I have a few labels for these wannabe tough guys. I call them keyboard cocky, or better yet, spacebar gangsters. They are nothing more than that "you lucky they holding me back" guy. Their tactics is nothing more than what I call the spirit of battle mail. But in this case, they use videos instead of a Macromedia Flash action script game that was sent through email. And for the gamer geeks, that's a little bit before your time.
Okay, so that clip which Pastor Richardson showed of Vocab talking with Isaiah Robertson wound up being the only pew-related clip that he showed in his entire video. However, that clip did not appear in my videos from last fall. You see, that clip is unique to the edited compilation Vocab made of my videos in March of this year. He added that clip as a sort of a prologue to the compilation which he was hosting. It's not something from my videos. Now, note that Pastor Richardson referred to a video narrated by me, yet you don't hear any narration from me in the sole solitary clip that he shared. So what was left out was literally all the points I made regarding the markings in the pews, which I would have thought would have been the more relevant subject. And this is actually, unfortunately, the second video in which Pastor Richardson purports to address my videos, yet doesn't actually grapple with any of the points. As last fall, he took part in a discussion on Sister E's account, which was about my videos, and yet in that discussion too, he never got around to grappling with the argument of my videos. On a side note, Pastor Richardson was apparently offended by the title Vocab gave to his compilation of portions from my videos. However, Pastor Richardson seems to have missed that that title, quote, not Hebrew on the church pews, translate, we dare you, end quote, was inspired by his own repeated challenges to others, declaring that it's not Aramaic or Arabic on those pews and daring those who claim otherwise to read the text for him and to translate it for him. In fact, here, consider some examples of Pastor Richardson saying such while keeping in mind Vocab's video title, which Pastor Richardson found offensive.
So those writings on those pews is a Shemitic language, is not Arabic, because if it was so, then how come they still haven't translated? Was able to read it. It's not Aramaic, because if it was Aramaic, whether it's modern or ancient or whatever, how come they still haven't been able to translate it?
Correct.
But guess what? They can't tell what that is on those pews.
Yep.
Even some that's trying to say that it's Arabic or Aramaic and all this other stuff, they make it clear they don't know. They're not going to be able to tell you what's on those pews. They can't read it, and that's a fact. I can guarantee you they will not be able to read what's on those pews. That's a fact. If they're going to say that it's Arabic, then read it in Arabic. If you're going to say that it's Aramaic, then read it in Aramaic. If you're going to say whatever, read it to me. Mm-hmm. Read it to me. Because if that's the case, then they'll be able to read it.
But I digress. In this next portion, Pastor Richardson is going to show a clip from his own videos, which he felt was relevant. With all due respect to Pastor Richardson, I personally do not consider this relevant, but because he insisted that it is relevant and also complained about people not addressing it previously, I'm going to show this portion in its entirety.
Here's the actual video.
I want to say Shalom. I'm here at the First African Baptist Church here down in Savannah, Georgia. This is my uncle right here, Pastor James Wesley Carr. He pastored this church back in 1907. So just wanted to show you guys here some history here. So this is the church that have ancient Hebraic writings here, but I just want to give you a little history that you won't see in your history books. But this is the actual sanctuary here. So I'm gonna do like a panoramic view so you can kind of see here. So you'll see all the founders up here. I'm gonna step back so you can see a bigger picture of the sanctuary. Right? You can see it behind me, right? I want y'all to pay attention to that. The pictures are listed just like ancient Hebrew reads from right to left. So the first pastor, which is his name is Reverend Andrew Bryan, 1812. Oh, you see how it is? It goes from right to left, right to left.
This gentleman right here. Huh? What happened? No, this the gentleman right here with the camera in his hand. Wave your hand. Pastor
James Wesley Carr.
Yeah, James Wesley Carr. No. What's your name?
Oh, Kelly Richardson.
Kelly Richardson.
Pastor Kelly Richardson.
He is a great grand nephew?
Yeah.
Nephew of one of our first pastors. Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's his uncle right here in the corner of the actual St. Lashawan here to your left.
He got the eyes.
It looked just like him. Got the same eyes anyway. Come on, guys. Come on. That's funny.
Notice how they deceptively left out me stating my connection to this historical landmark. Notice how they completely left out me explaining the arrangements of each pastor on the stained glass picture that's arranged according to how the Hebrew language is read from right to left.
With all due respect, Pastor Richardson's relation to a previous pastor in that church is not relevant to determining whether Hebrew appears in the markings on those pews, nor is the arrangement of the images in the stained glass windows near to those pews relevant to whether we can determine whether discernible, legible Hebrew appears in the markings on those pews. Here's a point I made in my previous videos. The presence of language, and I mean discernible, legible, written language, is demonstrated by pointing to strings of characters which give rise to words and phrases from that language. Consider this analogy. On your screen, you can see a collection of markings which have been made on a notebook which is currently found in my home. Suppose I claimed that the markings are discernible, legible English. What if I told you that I have a connection to where the markings are found? After all, they're found in my home. What if I claimed to descend from people who spoke and wrote in English? I could even show you things nearby to these markings which are arranged from left to right, which is precisely the direction English is written in. Would any of that convince you that discernible, legible English appears in these markings? I would hope the answer is no. No. Look, you know how to read English, so you would recognize English phrases if they appeared amongst these markings. Where these markings are found, or how I might be connected to the location where they're found, or who I'm related to, or how things near the markings are arranged, all of this is irrelevant to the question of whether discernible, legible English appears in these markings. Again, as was just noted, if we are going to demonstrate the presence of discernible language in these markings, we would do that by pointing to strings of characters which give rise to phrases from that language. At this point, it is worth recalling that Pastor Richardson had said that he can't discern any words, much less phrases, in the markings in those pews at that church in Georgia.
I can identify some of the letters, put it that way. I'm not going to say I know the words. I can identify some of the letters.
Meanwhile, in one of my videos from last fall, I presented a methodological thought experiment in which I presented a hypothetical case for Arabic appearing in the pews. Now, as I noted then, I don't actually believe that Arabic appears in those pews, but let's be honest. That hypothetical presentation made a stronger case for Arabic appearing in the pews than Pastor Richardson has yet to make for Hebrew appearing in the pews. Now, while I realize that sounds somewhat sharp, it's not my intention to insult Pastor Richardson. Although Pastor Richardson described my videos as quote-unquote tasteless, the reality is that I have approached the subject very respectfully. Now, I remain interested in discussing the pews with Pastor Richardson, but I ask that he actually grapple with the points I raised in my first 3 videos. That concludes the portion on the pews. This next section was not related to me, rather it had to do with some dispute Kelly Richardson had with Damon Richardson, so I won't be commenting on all of it, but as it related to Lashawan Quadash, I'd like to comment on part of it.
Now, since they want to bring up the Hebrew language, I want to highlight an exchange between me and Damon Richardson. In this thread, I was responding to the term Shekinah or Shekinah, some would say Shekinah, used by a woman in his post. I want to be clear, I was not rude with my comments. I simply mentioned to her that the word Shekinah or Shekinah is not a biblical word. It was never part of the Hebrew language. I ended the response to her with the Hebrew word shalom. Damon Richardson responded by telling me that shalom is not a Hebrew word and proceeded to attempt to take me through what I call a Christian pat down and an attempt to discredit my knowledge of Hebrew. In the end, using sarcasm, I asked him to take the approach that I am a novice and he's the one that's astute in the language and properly correct me in what he believes to be an error. So excuse the grammatical errors in the text displayed. The exchange was done through my cell phone. Pretend that I don't know Hebrew, or better yet, pseudo, as you've stated. Can you show me the word and correct me? You said you've studied Hebrew, then show me where the term shalom in this text. I am a novice and you're astute with the language. Can you show me the word shalom in this text? This is the actual writing. Send me your response offline. It's on the second row. Ba is the first letter, Sha is the second letter, La is the third letter, Y is the fourth letter, and Ma is the last letter. Can you show me shalom from the verse I posted? Notice how I gave him the answer, and yet he still could not answer my question.
While Pastor Richardson's point in this portion of the video was to highlight that the person he was disputing with allegedly could not find the relevant word in the Phoenician script, I'm more interested in what Pastor Kelly Richardson's intention was during the correspondence itself, not so much during the making of his video. There's a certain awkwardness in pointing to the word shalom and then asking one to show shalom from that very word. I imagine the answer is to say it's right there. However, being that he thinks the word is actually pronounced shalom, I'm guessing that part of his intention at the time was rooted in his assumption that the word is not and cannot be pronounced shalom. So I think this provides an opportunity to segue into taking a look at an ancient transliteration which is relevant to that word. I'd like to turn to 2 Samuel in the Masoretic text. So we're going to go to the 3rd chapter. So here you see the 3rd chapter here, and we're going to go to the 3rd verse, and specifically the name Abshalom, which has the word shalom within it. And now I'd like to switch over to the Septuagint. And again, this is 2 Samuel. Actually, the Septuagint, it's called 2 Kings. But anyway, 3rd chapter. And we're going to go again to the 3rd verse. And what we find is right here, Abe Salom with an omega. The wa was transliterated with an omega. Now, while Pastor Richardson presupposes Lashawan Quadash and assumes that the word, when it includes the wa, is pronounced shalawam, our oldest transliterations of a construction containing that word imply instead shalom with an O sound, with an O vocalization. This means we have ancient evidence in favor of the word with the wa being pronounced shalom, while Pastor Richardson has no evidence that the word, when including the wa, was actually pronounced shalawam. Moving on, in this next segment, Kelly Richardson makes an appeal to a 19th century work by Charles William Wall, which I've been familiar with for years. I even noted such in the live chat of Pastor Kelly Richardson's video.
Let's go to another book, Proof of Interpolations of the Vowel Letters in the Text of the Hebrew Bible by Charles William Wall, 1857. Page 8 says, in the first place, then about 2 centuries after the termination of the Babylonian captivity, and while a considerable number of persons still continued to speak pure Hebrew as their vernacular dialect, Asia was invaded by a people who had introduced into the original alphabet the vast improvement of vowel letters, and the Jews were in consequence forced, in spite of their prejudices, to learn a species of writing that made them acquainted with the use of such letters.
In that portion, Wall was referring to the matres lectionis. There are a bunch of proponents of Lashawan Quadash who make vague allusions to the matres lectionis without delving deeper. I have several videos on the subject of the matres lectionis vis-a-vis Lashawan Quadash, but just last Friday, Vocab Malone posted a helpful compilation of my different videos on the subject, so I recommend the video from May 1st titled Mater Lecciones on Vocab Malone's account. I would love for Pastor Richardson to view that video and share his thoughts. I'd be curious how he answers the questions posed therein. Like, for example, how does a proponent of Lashawan Quadash even know when a mater lectionis is present? For an example relevant, that I'll pose here is when Pastor Kelly Richardson calls the language Lashawan Quadash. Is there a mater lectionis in the word Lashawan? What about in Christ's name, Yahawashai, or however Pastor Kelly Richardson wants to pronounce it? And if Pastor Kelly Richardson wants to explore this subject, the subject of the matres lectionis, I encourage him to grapple with that video, but I would also like to discuss the subject with him. I'd be happy to correspond with him on the subject, or we can just go back and forth with our own videos.
Page 8 says this, but it will be going much too far in praise of the Masoretic system of vowels to assert that it has been completely preserved the ancient pronunciation of Hebrew, or kept it exactly the same as it was from the very outset. On the contrary, external evidence which is accessible to us on the subject serves to show that in the course of a vast number of successive ages, some changes have taken place in this respect, but still that they are not such as, in the least, to affect the sense of the scriptures. This book is clear that the Masoretic system did not preserve the original pronunciation of ancient Hebrew. The key.
I honestly wonder how Pastor Richardson understands the source he was appealing to. For example, the portion just covered stated that there is external evidence from antiquity which implies different vocalizations from some of what's implied by the pointing in the Masoretic text. But does Pastor Richardson think that means all vocalizations in the Masoretic text which disagree with Lashawan Quadash must therefore be wrong, or must therefore be among those changes? First of all, saying that some of the vocalizations in the Masoretic text are at odds with ancient evidence does not mean Lashawan Quadash somehow wins by default. I hope that's clear. Second, if Pastor Richardson is trying to respond to the critics of Lashawan Quadash by thinking that they simply assume all vocalizations in the Masoretic text, he will be going after a straw man. Slightly over 2 years ago, in January of 2018, I participated in a discussion with Faithful to God, which is now recorded in a video on his account titled Responding to Judah Natsara's Misunderstanding of Hebrew, Part 2. At the 1 hour and 10-minute mark of that video, I touched on the nuances of our approach, and I explicitly stated that we do not claim that the entirety of the ancient evidence agrees with the vocalizations in the Masoretic text. Rather, similar to Charles Wall, somewhat similar to him, we hold, and explicitly stated there, that some vocalizations in the Masoretic text are at odds with the ancient evidence. Here, listen to this brief clip. Let me explain the nuance of our argument for those who don't know. The nuances of our argument is this. We do believe that a great many, of the pronunciations in both the Masoretic text and modern Israeli Hebrew are backed up by ancient evidence. But we've never taken the position that everything in modern Israeli Hebrew and everything in the Masoretic text is backed up by the ancient evidence. The ancient evidence works against Lashawan Quadash, and it mostly agrees with the Masoretic text, but there are places where they diverge. But since we're on this subject, let's ask this question. What is the external evidence that Wall was referring to? What did Wall have in mind? And what is this ancient evidence that I made reference to? What did I have in mind? I'd like to point to something that appeared on the exact same page that Pastor Richardson was reading from, yet a portion which he didn't touch on. It says something about the oldest memorial of a Hebrew sentence or something like that. What does it state? Now, I want to be clear that I didn't just stumble across this line or just notice this line while watching Pastor Kelly Richardson's video. On the contrary, as I said, I've been familiar with this book for years, and I've been familiar with this particular line for years, and I've been familiar with the phenomenon of proponents of Lashawan Quadash appealing to this book, appealing to this very page, and yet conveniently missing this paragraph. Here's a tweet I wrote more than 5 years ago in response to a different proponent of Lashawan Quadash who made an appeal to the same book, to the same page, and just like Pastor Kelly Richardson, missed that paragraph. As I noted there, the line reads as follows, quote, "The oldest memorial we have in European writing of a Hebrew sentence is, I believe, the exclamation of our Lord upon the cross. Quote, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Recorded by St. Matthew in the original sounds, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." In short, Charles William Wall, the very source that Pastor Richardson appealed to, takes the exact same approach that we've advocated for, which is that rather than merely defer to the Masoretic text, we should look at the ancient transliterations like those that are found in the New Testament, as they too capture ancient vocalizations that are far older than the Masoretic text. And with all due respect to Pastor Kelly Richardson, he has yet to really grapple with the phenomenon of the ancient transliterations. I'll sum up our position and our appeal to the ancient transliterations this way. When we appeal to the ancient transliterations, we're not doing so as part of some sort of blanket confirmation of the entirety of the spectrum of vocalizations in the Masoretic text. Rather, we do so as an argument against Lashawan Quadash. And the reason why the ancient transliterations provide evidence against Lashawan Quadash is because they show that in antiquity there were vocalizations which proponents of Lashawan Quadash claim were not actually part of ancient Hebrew. Also, what this 5-year-old tweet shows is that this isn't new for us. We're familiar with these arguments. We've seen them before, and we've had ready responses for years. By the way, before I close, here's the page in the format that Pastor Kelly Richardson used. You can see at the top of your screen the text stating that one goes too far in their praise for the Masoretic text if they claim that it completely preserves the ancient pronunciations, as external evidence shows some changes. the portion Kelly Richardson read, but then we can scroll down to the next paragraph, the one he didn't read, where at the bottom of the page you get the text that I just read, where you see Wall himself, the very source that Richardson appealed to, appealing to the exact same thing we appeal to, the ancient transliterations, including but not limited to the cry on the cross as recorded in Matthew. Now, I'll close here, but in doing so, I'll once again reiterate that I remain interested in having a respectful and cordial dialogue with Pastor Richardson on the subject of the pews and on the subject of Lashawan Quadash. I'd love to correspond with him on the subject, or as I said before, we can just slowly unfold this dialogue by each side making videos in response to one another. On that note, I look forward to the comments, if any, from Pastor Richardson, as well as comments from anyone else. God bless.